They just crossed $1 trillion. That is the value of the trade among members of the BRICS. They are not anti-American. What they are interested in doing is world economy that isn't dominated by the US dollar. The BRICS is the most organized global manifestation. The BRICS have just had, I believe it's their 17th annual meeting in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, hosted by the leader there, Mr. Lula. Before I talk about the significance of their meetings and what they've decided to do sooner, some later, I want to also mention a milestone that they achieved just a few weeks ago when it was announced that they just crossed $1 trillion. That is the value of the trade among members of the BRICS. Why is that important? Well, it's important because that's what the BRICS is about, doing international trade on their own, out from under the domination of the United States. And that's indeed why the BRICS are important. They are not anti-American, as Mr. Trump casually likes to say. That's really not relevant to them. What they are interested in doing is becoming a part of a world economy that isn't anymore dominated by the US dollar as the global currency, by the US military as a kind of policeman for what trade can or cannot happen, as the source of goods they have to buy, markets they have to sell into, money they have to borrow, investments they have to secure. The United States came out of World War II dominant. All the other potential competitors had been destroyed economically and often also militarily and politically by World War II. And by that I mean Japan, China, Russia, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Canada, you name it. They could not compete for one reason or another. The United States, king of the hill. Now, of course, any reasonable person with even a minimal grasp of history would have known that these were very special, very odd circumstances, and that the dominance of the United States, the dollar as the global currency, the United States as the producer of all producers, whether it was manufacturing or services or financial instruments, didn't matter. The US dominated. It had the atom bomb. It had the overwhelming military, etc. Anyone with a good sense of history would have known this can't last. The advanced economies like Germany and Japan would come back. Yes, they would take a while, but they had the brain power, they had the institutions. And then there were the countries in Western Europe that had also achieved quite high levels of development. And there were the dark horses, if you like, Russia, China. No one quite knew whether they would come back from their destruction, and if so, how quickly. No one imagined what the Russians could do, and no one even had the faintest idea of what the Chinese proved they could do after World War II. Well, Americans were a little naive. They indulged themselves in believing it would last forever. Well, it didn't. And we now know that, but the BRICS is the most organized global manifestation. And that's why it's important to take note of the annual meeting they just had in Rio and the fact that they are bigger than they have ever been before, that they're doing more trade with one another than they ever did before, that they're borrowing money and making investments in one another more than they ever did before. And all of that is happening outside of and out from under the control, the domination of the United States. This is not to be confused with a lot of verbiage about de-dollarization. That's talk that's mostly symbolic. At this point, there isn't a substitute for the US dollar that could be the alternative they go to. They are looking to settle their payments with one another in each other's currencies and working out a way to keep track of all of that. And the technology, blockchain, and others now exists to make that relatively straightforward. And they are going in that direction, not to produce another currency other than the dollar. We're not at that point. That may develop, but we're not there. And that's not a priority of the BRICS. Even when they talk about it, it's clear they know that that's far in the future. They have to build the foundation. And what that means is economic development, and economic development based on their needs as the priority, not how they fit into a global economy dominated by the United States. That used to be what development meant. If you were a poor country in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and you went to Washington or you went to New York and you needed investment capital, or you needed to open a market, or you needed to secure supplies, you always got treated by saying, how can this thing you want be consistent with what we here want in New York and Washington? And a compromise was the outcome. You got something for your canal in Nigeria, you got something for your medical system in Paraguay, but you also had to do all of that within the framework of loan agreements that the United States imposed on you, trade agreements, or you had to be sure not to do something that the United States didn't want, because if you did, then they wouldn't be so forthcoming on whatever it is you needed. What the BRICS is about is creating within the world economy a new and different part of it. And that part is the part not subject to the United States' direct or indirect economic, political, and military power. Do they escape from that 100%? No. The United States remains a global force. I mean, there are three major wars in the world today: Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran, and the United States is a central player in every one of them. And before that, we had Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam, and I could go on. So the world is not free of the United States and will not be for quite some time. But the relative position of the United States is shrinking, and it has been for 50 years. Only it's going faster now because the institutions are being formed and developed and nurtured as we speak. It is no longer appropriate to talk about the United States being challenged by the economic powerhouse that China has become. That's still true, but it isn't the main story. The BRICS are the main story. China is the key part of that, no question. But the BRICS are much bigger than just China. And they are the new phenomena of the world economy and need to be understood in that way. They are quite different one from the other. They have clashes in their cultures, their religions, their political ambitions, their military capabilities. They have arguments. They will have more of them. They don't all look at the Israeli activity in Gaza in quite the same way, and so on. But whatever those differences, they are carving out a space in the world economy that is a new option for everyone.